Hey, this is Antonio. Welcome back to my channel. Know who's ready for some fighting words. In this video, I want to do a breakdown / prediction for Errol Spence as he is now going up against Keith Onetime Thurman. If you're new to the channel or you're not new to the channel, you need a refresher. Basically, what I do is I put both competitors side by side, and I just run down a list of attributes that will work best for any fighter. And whoever has more points in the end, when I tally them up, that's the individual that I'm going with. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I'm going to start with resume. Now, when you look at both these guys, yeah, they pretty much have fought the same people. However, especially because, you know, the stablemates and all that. But however, I know some people might say, well, Thurman fought Pacquiao. That's true. That is true. Thurman did fight Pacquiao. But Thurman fought a slower, aged Pacquiao. I believe if Pacquiao would have been like maybe 3-4 years younger, he would have beat Thurman. So that's nothing to brag about for Thurman. Quite frankly, I felt like Thurman should have put Pacquiao away. And Pacquiao was literally fighting for his life. So I don't really want to, I can't give him the Pacquiao. Not to mention he lost. So I really can't give him the Pacquiao. But when I look at Spence, Spence beat Kell Brook when Kell Brook was on top of his game. Kell Brook was big, strong, he was healthy, you know, so I gotta look at that. Also, Sean Porter. And I feel like Sean Porter is such a gauge for anybody who he fights, you know, and it's the way Spence handled Porter. Most people, they'll fight Porter, but it's more like they're gonna fight for their lives. Not to say that it was not a hard fight for Spence, because it definitely was. And, you know, there was a point where Porter was definitely winning that fight. But I felt like Spence fought Porter at his own game. That's what did it for me. So because of the Kell Brook fight and because of the Porter fight, and you know what, now that I'm just thinking back, Spence did to Danny Garcia what no one has ever done. After the Danny Garcia fight with Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia felt like he won that fight. He felt like he did enough, at least, to win the fight, or at least to warrant an immediate rematch or a draw. There was no question whatsoever who won the fight between Danny Garcia and Errol Spence. So there you go. Resume is Errol Spence. Power, got to go with Keith Onetime Thurman. Now, granted, neither one of these guys, listen, Errol Spence has not man downed anybody in quite some time, okay? And Keith Thurman has not been one time in a very long time. But still, I think of the two, the much heavy-handed guy is Keith Onetime Thurman. And just listening to a lot of his past opponents like Danny Garcia, you know, those guys would all say, yeah, he hits really hard. So, and I'm also talking about like one-punch knockout power. I feel like one-punch knockout power is definitely Keith Thurman. It's not Errol Spence. Tactician. I think Keith Thurman is a much better tactician. You got to look at it like this. Keith Thurman is also a boxing analyst. He knows how to break down fights. He actually has a very, very amazing boxing brain, boxing mind, boxing IQ, boxing historian also. And when I look at Errol Spence pretty much does the same thing every single time. I think he's great at what he does. I remember once Bernard Hopkins said, I do the basic things really, really, really well. And when I look at Errol Spence, I think he also does the basic things really, really, really well. And that's not a knock on Errol Spence, because it wasn't a knock when Bernard Hopkins said it. He was comparing himself to Roy Jones Jr. And he said, yeah, he's great. Look at the things he can do. And he said, but me, I'm just a hard worker, and I do the basic things really, 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 really well. And when I look at it, I see Errol Spence as a guy who does the basic things really, really, really well. And when I look at somebody who could implement, you know, a game plan and stick with it, or at least adjust along the way and, you know, tweak along the way during rounds, I look at Keith Thurman. I think he's much better at that. And that's before the fight and during the fight. So that was Keith Thurman. Arsenal, who has more weapons in the ring? Now, I do think Keith Thurman is the more creative boxer, but I think Errol Spence has more weapons in the ring, and I think he will actually use all the weapons. When I look at Keith Thurman, he's like a guy who has like a bag full of weapons, and he'll use it one time. And like, you ever play a video game and you like, you collect all the weapons, and then like once you use the weapon, you kind of throw it away, and then because you're looking for another weapon. I feel like that's Keith Thurman. Like in a fight, like he'll use something, and then be like, all right, I'm done with that. Errol Spence will actually use something, and he'll gauge how effective it is, and he will continue to use it. When I look at Keith Thurman, he's very simplistic in his approach a lot of times. And that's, I feel like in this fight, that's going to be a detriment to him to be so simplistic, especially with, throwing, like he's not big on throwing combinations. That's going to be a detriment to him because you're fighting a guy who can easily throw 100 punches in a round. So you need to be able to throw a combination, in more than one every round, like, because that's not going to cut it. At some point, he's going to catch you. He will corner you, and he is bigger than you. Versatility. I do think Keith Thurman is more versatile than Errol Spence. When Keith Thurman fights a guy, he's basically molding himself into what he needs to be to get through that particular opponent. Errol Spence, on the other hand, is just going to be Errol Spence, no matter what. If you give Errol Spence a hard time, Errol Spence is going to step on the Errol Spence gas. That's it. He's not going to pull back on anything. He's not going to slow down on anything. To Errol Spence, the only thing I ever need to do, Errol Spence has the mentality of a puncher, like a Deontay Wilder, a Mike Tyson, a George Foreman, somebody like that. What's their mentality? Well, worst case scenario, I hit hard. And Errol Spence, worst case scenario, I'm just going to do some more Errol Spence, and that should be enough to get through this guy. But you look at Keith Thurman, and he's going to try something different. So I got to give that to Keith One-Time Thurman. Strength. I definitely think Errol Spence is stronger than Keith Thurman. And I'm talking about in a clinch, what's going to happen when Errol can actually cut off the ring. And there are going to be, I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of spots where Keith Thurman's really going to have to muscle his way out. And it's going to be a push and shove. And I don't foresee him being stronger than Errol Spence. He did look really muscular and really strong in the Barrios fight. But then again, in comparison to Barrios, you were talking about a guy who came up in weight. So it's not the same as gauging him with somebody who's naturally that size with him. But he was really muscular, really, really strong in that fight. But I would still have to say that it would be Errol Spence. Again, gauging through the Porter fight, Porter is a really strong guy. He's a really compact muscle, and he normally pushes guys back. And I can easily see, Errol Spence doing that to Keith Thurman because, Porter pushed Spence back a few times, but Spence equally pushed him back as many times. So I got to give that to Errol Spence. I think in the clinch, that's going to be his domain. Not to say that's not going to be his domain anyway. We all know the last place that Keith Thurman, regardless of the opponent, wants to be is in a clinch. But still, that's definitely going to be the domain of Errol Spence. Cardio. Again, come on. We know exactly who this is going to be. It's going to be Errol Spence. This is going to be really interesting again because Keith Thurman can get tired. And we all know Keith Thurman's going to be moving the entire time. He's not a stationary fighter. He's one of the guys who's been blessed with legs and he can move. He can fight and move at the same time. But it's going to be really difficult because he's really going to burn up a lot of energy moving around that ring and then fighting Spence off the entire time. And honestly, when you have somebody who's pressing you the way Errol Spence presses you, it's exhausting mentally. You're already doing all this moving physically, but mentally it's exhausting when somebody won't let you breathe. And I'm curious to see how Keith Thurman's going to hold up with Errol constantly pressing him. Confidence. Well, Errol has never lost. So there you go. Confidence. Errol's never lost. He's never lost. But on top of that, Errol was calling out Keith Thurman when Errol was a quote-unquote nobody in the boxing world. He was calling out Keith Thurman. And he was actively calling out Keith Thurman. And he would poke at Keith Thurman every chance he got when there was a camera or a microphone in his face. And, you know, Keith, even when he was in the presence of Keith would kind of laugh it off and be like, "Oh, we're gonna fight one day, baby. We're gonna get it on," you know. But we're only getting it on now because Keith wants a strap pack. So trust me, I believe if Keith could have had his way, somebody else, like maybe Ugas, would have won the fight or something like that against Errol Spence, and he would much rather fight somebody like Ugas than Errol Spence. So yeah, confidence goes to Errol Spence. He's never lost, and he's always called for this fight because he's always seen something in Keith One-Time Thurman. IQ. Well, I said it earlier, and I'll say it again, that Keith One-Time Thurman is also a boxing analyst, and you know he has a great boxing mind. Just because here's the sidebar to that. Just because you have a great boxing mind doesn't necessarily mean you can physically implement any of the things that you're seeing or you're visualizing. You know, you've written out, that doesn't mean you can implement any of those things. But I do believe because of his boxing mind, he can set up the proper game plan. The question is, can you implement on the night of? That's the question. But in terms of who has the better IQ, I think by far Keith Thurman has a better boxing IQ than Errol Spence. Durability. Clearly, we're going with Errol Spence on this. I mean, clearly. Dude is tough. I mean, he's never been down. Dude is tough. And he's willing to take a few to give one back. He's not a slouch in there. When I look at the knockdown from Pacquiao on Keith Thurman, that would have never happened on Errol Spence. I think that would have been one of the hardest rounds. Well, probably not, only because that knockdown happened at the end of the round. But that would have never happened to Errol Spence. Earl's always in position to throw back. Errol is always in position to take it, but also to give it back. He's always he doesn't get credit for the defense that he has. And he does have a very defensive mindset and also stance. It just comes across because he throws so much volume that it's like, yo, this guy's seek and destroy. He's very defensive. He's actually very defensive. He doesn't get the credit for that. Footwork. Keith One-Time Thurman. I think Errol Spence does have nice footwork, but again, like Bernard Hopkins said, he's very, very, very basic, but he does the basic things extremely well. And when you're talking about somebody who's a little bit more fluid and comfortable and on his feet, Keith One-Time Thurman, you know, he's one of those moving fighters. He's not going to be a stationary target, you know, and the more pressure you put on him, the more he's gonna be a moving target. You know, Keith does not like to fight in a telephone booth. That is not his dream or ideal fight. His ideal fight is distance. Why? Because he likes to wound up. Why? Because he knows he has that one-hitter quitter. I still believe he has that one-hitter quitter. And I know in this fight with Errol Spence, he's going to have to use that. He's going to have to look for that punch, that particular punch. He's going to have to go in the ring with a one-time mentality, because I just don't see him handling the barrage of punches that Spence is going to throw at, you know, give him round after round. Natural ability. I've been saying it this whole video, and I'll continue to say it. I think Errol Spence is an amazing fighter, but I think he's really great at the basics. I think he's just really, really, really great at the basics. I feel like Keith Thurman, the way he fights, is such a creative thing that clearly that's not taught. You know, Roy Jones, that's not taught. In no way, shape, or form am I putting Keith Thurman in the stratosphere with Roy Jones. But what I am saying is he is very light on his feet. He is very creative. You know, these are the things that I'm saying. You know, he has a natural ability. You know, he can think outside the box. You know, he can lead with punches that most guys in the combination with. That's what I'm saying. Grit and heart. Errol, the truth Spence, he is the truth. He's going to test you. That's the truth. He actually has the right name because he's going to find the truth in you. Do you really want to be in this ring? Do you really want to be in this sport? Do you really have it in you to go another round? Do you really see yourself making it to the last round? He's going to find the truth in you. So it's actually the proper name for him. Errol Spence, grit and heart. Plus, again, he's never lost. And that Kell Brook fight was not easy. That Sean Porter fight was not easy. The Ugas fight, listen, there were some times where he got cracked. So, yeah, Errol Spence. Last but not least, I have speed. It's weird, and I also credit this to his newfound dedication. But I feel like Errol Spence has grown as a fighter tremendously after the car accident. And I mean that physically as well. I think mentally he's grown with his dedication, but physically he's grown with his attributes. I feel like I don't know if it's just me. And I do want somebody to write that in the comments if I'm tripping. But I feel like he's Errol Spence 2.0. That's just how I feel. I'm giving him the speed factor. At least speed with the hands. Legs, clearly, is going to be Keith Onetime Thurman, but I'm going to give, upper body, I think it's Errol Spence. I really do. Plus, in the way that he chambers his punches. He punches from here. And Keith doesn't always punch in straights. He's more of a hooker. So, in that sense, I think he can at least get to the target before Keith Onetime Thurman. And that's pretty much it with my list. And looking at my tally, I have Errol Spence at 8 and I have Keith Thurman at 6. So there you have it. I'm going with Errol Spence. Now I have another segment, and it's basically just saying, what can the person do to secure victory? So I'm starting now with Keith Thurman. What can Thurman do? Well, he can back Spence up. He is the harder puncher. He can back Spence up. That's one thing that he can do. We all know that Spence doesn't can he fight backing up? Yes, but he's not going to do it all night. Can Spence fight backing up? Sure. Does Spence want to fight backing up? No, he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't like it. He's not the most comfortable. Sharks don't like going backwards. He's not the most comfortable. Predators don't like backing up. And I think that would be a plus for Keith Thurman. Again, you are the heavier-handed guy, but you're going to have to get in there and you're going to have to mix it up in order to back this guy off you. But if you back him off you, now you have momentum because he's not going to throw as much. That's the thing with Errol Spence. He will throw, but he's not going to throw half as much if he's backing up. So that's opportunity. But you have to be willing to take that opportunity. And that's a question for Keith Onetime Thurman. What can Spence do? Attack the body of Keith Onetime Thurman. We all know it. I've been saying it for over a year now. Keith Thurman is weak in the body. I don't care how conditioned he is. He does not like body punches. Period. He would much rather get punched in the face than get punched in his ribs. Go to the body. And who better than Errol Spence? He is a phenomenal, tenacious body puncher. I think he's the perfect guy to really put Keith Thurman down. I can see Keith Thurman going down from a body punch, a body shot. I really can. I do see Keith Thurman going down. I see him going down more than once. I don't necessarily see him getting knocked out, but I do see him going down at least twice in this fight. What can Thurman do? Jab. For two reasons. Jab and combinations. First, jab, because we all know Keith Thurman is not really known for that jab, and he's not going to stick to the jab. And I think that would give Spence something to deal with. Again, he's much heavier-handed. That would give Spence something to deal with. Plus, I'm pretty sure he didn't plan for that because we all know Keith Thurman doesn't throw a lot of jabs. But on top of that, combinations. Those combinations are going to help because reality is you're not going to be able to throw 1 and 1-2s the entire night. You're just not. That is not going to suffice. That is not going to cut it. If you go to the judges' scorecard, you're not going to win. And if you do that anyway, outside of the judges, Errol Spence is going to eat you alive. Period. He's going to throw at least 80 to 100 punches around. There's no way in this green earth you're going to throw those 1-2s and get away with that. That's not going to happen. What can Spence do? Straight punches to the body. You know who's really great at that? Floyd Mayweather. He's really great at that. What it will do is just zap out the air. So once you get hit, it's and it'll slow you down. It'll stop you actually in your tracks. Especially if you're backing up. That can be a doorway to a clean knockout. because it will stop you. Your legs will they won't give out, but they will like almost a split millisecond freeze up. But you do that enough, you literally take his legs away and you take his air away. You make him slower and you make him hesitant. Now he's going to start flinching because we already know he's going up against Errol Spence, this tremendous body puncher. So we know his arms are going to be right here. Keith Thurman does keep his arms a little low. Well, now he's got to worry about the midsection, the center. He can't afford really to do this because you can't do this and back up and be effective the way he fights. So it's going to be a problem. I think that straight to the body would really be a very useful weapon. What can Thurman do? Not allow Errol Spence to plant his feet. This is going to be a very rapid fight anyway because we're dealing with Keith Onetime Thurman. He's not going to stay still. The upside to that in his favor is Errol's not going to have all the sting on his punches that he would like because he knows he's going to have to be moving all night. And it won't allow him to plant his feet the way he would like to. Errol is typically always in position, but he's not going to be able to plant his feet the way he wants to. And that could be opportunity for Thurman. It's going to be opportunity one because if he's not going to get hit with the full brunt of Spence's power, well, then he can definitely return. He can throw, he's fast enough to throw off a combination. But also, if he's not there, he can get out of the way and return fire. Counterpunching is going to be very, very, very big in this fight in terms for Keith Thurman. Very big because he's not going to lead this dance. You know it, and I know it. He ain't going to lead this dance. So that's going to be another thing. I just feel like this whole fight is just going to be interesting. I really want to see what Keith Thurman comes in and tries to do. I don't feel like he has the legs that he used to have either. So it's really going to be interesting. And he might just pack on a bunch of muscle. Who knows? You know what would be a great weapon for Errol Spence, for Keith Onetime Thurman? Just because of the way Thurman likes to bounce around or move around the ring. And I hate to say run because it's boxing. You're utilizing the space in the ring. But shovel hooks. A shovel hook is great, especially against an opponent like Thurman, because he won't know where it's going. He doesn't know the destination, the location of the punch. Because when you have a shovel hook, you could go to the body, but you could also go to the head easily. So he doesn't know where it's going. And Spence is pretty good at masking things, and he's always kind of low anyway. So I think that's a nice little weapon that would give Thurman some problems. And if he's not consistent, well, let's say if he purposely isn't consistent with the shovel hook, and then he just springs it back up round after round or something like that. So maybe he uses it, once or twice in round one, once or maybe 4 times in round 4, round 6 he'll use it again, and then closing out the fight he'll use it a lot more depending on the success of it earlier. Overall, I have Spence winning. I think too much pressure. I think too much of a volume puncher. And again, I'm looking at I'm remembering the Pacquiao fight with Keith Thurman, and you couldn't handle a smaller guy who was older, who was very, battle broken because, Pacquiao's been through some wars. I don't know what you're going to do with this taller, young, strong, big volume puncher. I don't know what you're going to do with him. That's a problem. That's a problem. So I just have, number one, I have Errol Spence for my tally, but just, replaying this thing. And I keep thinking about the Pacquiao fight. I think that's a very telling fight. The Barrios fight is also very telling that he couldn't get Barrios, he couldn't knock Barrios out. I think that's very telling. So, could that mean that one time was once upon a time, or, one time was just getting back into his groove? Who knows? Lastly, and this, I promise this is a bit of a longer video. I think another thing that's going to give Errol Spence an edge is his mental. Why? Because he was already gearing up and had his hopes and dreams set on Terrence Crawford, the other guy in the division who's arguably, some would say, better than Errol Spence. Also without a loss. So if I'm looking at this guy, and now I'm forced to fight this guy, Thurman's a step down. He's had losses and he hasn't looked, so he's a step down. If I've been focusing on this guy and training for this guy, or I'm not sure how deep he went into training or if he even did training, but still his mentality was there. He knew he had to be the best of the best of the best. And now he's going to fight this guy. Well, he already put himself mentally right here. And now he's going to fight this guy. I just don't see how Thurman gets to that new heightened mentality of Errol Spence. And that's my prediction. I have Errol Spence. I do see Errol Spence knocking Keith Thurman down. I really do. And it's crazy because I just feel like the number is 2. I feel like he puts him on his bottom twice during the fight. But there you have it. I have Errol the Truth Spence. I think he will bring all the truth out of Keith Thurman in this fight. But please, as always, drop your comments down below. I would love to hear what you have to say. And please like, please share, please subscribe to my channel.